Hello, my name is David Boulter. I play keyboards and various other instruments for Tindersticks. I actually wrote it. We'd not long moved to London. We were living in an area called Kilburn, in sort of North London, and I was in a laundrette, just waiting for my washing to do, and the idea kind of came to me. It was around the time we released our first single, which was called Milk Teeth Patchwork, and I suppose one idea was that it was a short story to go with that single, which is why I mentioned Milky Teeth and Patchwork in the first sort of section. But it was also, at the time, I had there was two girls I was very close to, two friends. One of them was actually fighting cancer, which she later died of, and the other one was kind of always complaining about situations that a boyfriend wasn't good enough or this wasn't good enough. And I suppose the story just grew from this idea of somebody having this kind of very bland life, the brother watching his sister who has this kind of very exciting but ultimately painful life. And it just grew from this idea really of these two people that one wanted life so much and it was being taken away from her, and the other one had everything and was completely dismissing it and complaining about it, and it sort of like grew from that idea really. And I suppose a lot to do with how I felt just moving to London and trying to find my space in this big city. Yeah, I think because we'd sort of come from that place, and I suppose it's also a lot of reflects on a lot of the kind of literature and films I've probably been watching all my life up to that point. I always kind of like these black comedies and this darker kind of film really, that where you find sort of a sense of fun in something that isn't necessarily funny really. I think that's a lot of what Tindersticks music was about. A lot of people used to say that we were kind of a miserable band, but I think we had kind of fun making this misery in some way. I think it's changed a lot, and I think we tried purposely to sort of get away from this. I suppose when the band first began, we were making these very big dramatic songs, big albums, and there was a lot put into them, and I suppose we tried to get away from that and make things a bit lighter sonically, or even the themes of songs, or make them slightly less. I suppose the other thing is that our lives just changed as well, that there was a very particular period of our lives that the first few albums were about really, which changed. The music came later. I suppose at the time when I wrote My Sister, there was myself, Stuart Neal, three members of the band living in a house together, so everything, the first album was basically built there. We sort of, every time we came in from work, we would sort of be working on music, or days off we would spend refining the songs. And I think that a lot of my writing developed at that point. It was very focused after moving down from Nottingham. We were working in record shops. Everything about life was to do with music. We got involved in this kind of, not really a scene, but there was definitely something happening with a lot of different bands around in London, so it was just there all the time. And I think we moved to a new house. Mark, who was also in the band, joined, and he lived with us, so 4 people in the band were living together. And that's kind of where the music from My Sister came. I started writing these little quirky instrumentals, and I think it was developing into this point where I needed to write a song musically that went with the story really. Yeah, I mean, I remember we had a tiny little room that I did some demos in, and it's basically that song. We just had to structure it to make it sort of work for 7 or 8 minutes, whatever it is. So that it kind of, and we did that. We were quite fortunate to support Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds on a tour just before our first album, and Blixer from the band from the Bad Seeds told us that he thought we really enjoyed this studio that we kind of vaguely knew, called Connie Planks, where a lot of Kraftwerk music was recorded, and Ultravox. At that point, they were kind of winding down. I think Connie was already dead by that point. you could only really go there if you were invited or recommended. And when we called up, they were a bit sort of, "Who are you? Why are you calling us?" And we said, "Well, Blix had told us to call." We said, "Oh, Blix had called you." So we were invited to go and see the studio. And it was such a great place and such a great feeling. And that's where the music for my sister really came together, the basic track, really. Yeah, I think there is a strong connection. Maybe not so much. I suppose the connection is really that when we were making an album, I think there were two important albums, not at that time, but from our history, that we considered to be great albums. And one of them was the Velvet Underground album with The Gift on it. I think that the fact that you could I think that for us they were the perfect kind of band. They were very musical, but at the same time it felt like they just walked into a studio and took instruments for the first time. It was that very, very sort of punk ethic, but of course John Cale was a classically trained musician, so it was something we were very interested in. I think another album which was in the back of our minds more than something we listened to was the Beatles, the White Album, that you could get this massive amount of work and it into an album that told a story throughout. And I think it all came together, and I think when we made the second album with my sister on it, we kind of learned so much from the first album that we could do this thing that sonically all worked together, had the story and had everything, really, I think. I suppose that the initial response was people were shocked that my sister had lived through this life, including my sister, who was when she heard us, we did a radio session for BBC Six Music, and we played the music live, and my sister was listening, and I remember her calling me the next day saying, "So I'm supposed to have died then, am I?" Yeah, I mean, I suppose it was, I think at the time, the band were definitely on a high anyway, but I think it became something that gave another view to the band, another outlet. It kind of made the band more literary in some way. It kind of opened up a different side to what we do, which was something that we really wanted anyway. And I think it just, and for me personally, it gave me the chance to write without having to think about writing a book, which I think is possible, but I just don't have that kind of concentration to sort of sit down. I get bored very quickly. I can do a chapter, which I think maybe my sister is, and then I get bored and I have to move on to the next thing. So. Yeah, I think music is quite easy. Not easy, but I find music quite easy in a way that you get inspired to create something sonically, and whether it's an album or a piece of music that's a minute long, it kind of, you do it and you can walk away from it, whereas writing a book, I think, is a much greater discipline, and then taking that on a step further to making something like a film, where you have to have this massive body of work just to make. I mean, I've seen just making films ourselves for like 3 minutes long, the amount of effort that you have to put in to make this very short piece of film. It's kind of music is very easy compared to that, I think. I think it was just to try and keep it concise. I think we just wanted to make something that was a bit more immediate, and I think because we knew people had the album, we didn't want to try and just replicate the album, so it got taken off, I think, just for ease of making something that was concise. I wrote it where I am now, basically in Prague, and I suppose there was a point. I've always been writing stories, and I suppose I got to the point where the band broke down for a little. We kind of, half the band kind of fractured and left, and Stuart made a couple of solo albums, and around that point I was trying to sort of find my own way and thinking what I would do, and I thought maybe I should make my own record, and it seemed an obvious thing to make a spoken word record, and it grew out of that idea, and I suppose then just got taken on by Tindersticks. But yeah, I suppose it was a time when I just had my first son, and I was reflecting on my past and situations that I'd been in my past. Yeah, and I think the thing is, it's basically kind of a true story. And when I was living in Nottingham, I had a close friend who I was in a band with, just a duo. We did this instrumental duo, and it was something that I really enjoyed. It was the closest thing that I did it personally in Nottingham until I met Stuart and joined Asphalt Ribbons, which became Tindersticks. It was the closest thing I came to making sort of music that felt like it had its own identity. We just did these sort of like almost soundtrack-ish kind of little instrumentals that nobody really wanted to see anyway. But I suppose it's basically about an evening I spent with him out in Nottingham, and it's kind of strange because around the time I wrote it, he had diabetes, and he died from complications to that illness. So it's another kind of morbid story, but I suppose it was just celebrating a moment of our lives together of like what we were doing when we were still in Nottingham, just a very sort of bland, normal Friday, but sort of adding something to it that kind of took it out of that blandness and made it something special. It was a very similar thing that I just had this small demo that is generally me. I mean, I have a lot of instruments around, and I have this old organ that it's very cheesy sort of, and I basically did a lot of work on that. And the same thing went to the band, and we basically built it from this small idea into something that had a sort of dramatic kind of feel to it, adding a few different layers to give it, to let it build and drop and things like that, really. So it's originally when I first wrote it as a piece on my own, it was in 3 parts, so each part was slightly different, and it kind of ended, and then there would be an intermission of different music, and then the next part would start, but we kind of put it all together. Yes, I think so. I think I'm just working on something at the moment, which I suppose I have like a drawer full of different things, ideas, and that I've started. Some of them probably won't ever go anywhere, but I suppose when something happens, like Stuart saying, "Oh, we could use this for Tindersticks," or anything like that, is when it kind of really starts to work. Because other than that, it's similar to my music. I generally just sit in my room and make it, and then when there's an outlet for it, it gets out there. But basically, I'm writing a lot of things at the moment, which hopefully the band has a sort of 25-year anniversary around this year, probably, really. But next year, we're thinking of maybe releasing something which may be story-based rather than musical-based, that I'm sort of thinking about at the moment, really. Yeah, if it all comes together, it could be nice, because it'll be kind of a history of the beginning of the band, but in my style.